Anywhere you turn, you'll find influence in action. A fast-talking stockbroker persuades a couple near retirement to sink their entire life savings into a Ponzi scheme. A CEO pressures an accounting officer to falsify financial statements. A terrorist cell recruits a frustrated youth and convinces him to strap explosives to his chest. But for all the horrible things we can be talked into, people can also use influence to achieve fantastic results. Think of the firefighter who talks a depressed man out of jumping, or of the dynamic teacher who inspires her struggling student to stay in school. And then there are the truly great triumphs of influence. Consider the remarkable story of Nelson Mandela, chronicled in numerous books and movies. How can one person use his powers of persuasion to prevent an all-out civil war? Nelson Mandela showed us how. In this course, we're going to look at the factors that contribute to success stories like Mandela's. We're going to explore how some people harness the power of influence to achieve worthwhile goals at home, at work, and in their social lives. But we're also going to analyze the cautionary tales. We should never forget that influence can be used against us, that we can be swayed to buy things we don't need and pressured to perform actions we really shouldn't. So in addition to developing your influence skills, one important goal of this course is to give you information that will help you resist outside influence when it's in your best interest to do so. Because, let's face it, influence is pervasive in our daily lives. In fact, research psychologist Kevin Dutton makes the claim that we are subjected to influence attempts somewhere near 400 times a day. 400. And business author Dan Pink suggests in his latest book that we are always selling something, even if it's just an idea. Now, that might seem overstated, but think back over yesterday. How many conversations did you have where someone suggested a course of action to you? Why don't we eat there tonight? Or, hey, let's remodel the master bath. Or, I'd like to get a second dog. I had that last conversation a while back, was convinced, and spent weeks wiping messes off my floor. Then, there's the steady bombardment of advertising. If you count all those pop-up ads that assail you whenever you browse the web these days, then 400 influence attempts might actually seem too low. And what about politics? I live in the state of Iowa, and we have candidates trying to convince us that they're qualified to be President of the United States for what seems like 2 full years leading up to the primaries. Like it or not, it seems that someone is always trying to persuade us to do something. Of course, not every attempt at influence succeeds. Some of those Iowa campaigns, for example, the speeches, advertisements, endorsements, and rallies, some of them really excite people and win votes, but others fall completely flat. Why is that? Well, we're going to spend a lot of time in this course examining the mechanisms that contribute to the success or failure of persuasion. But first, let's take a moment to pin down what we mean by success and failure in the first place. If I'm trying to convince you to do something, what are the possible outcomes of my effort? Ask any management scholar that question, and she'll probably identify 3 possible outcomes: conflict, compliance, and commitment. The 3 C's. If you've raised a child through adolescence and been told you are not the boss of me, then you have encountered conflict. Conflict is when the target of your influence resists your ideas and even fights against you. It is, in effect, a failure of influence. Successful influence, on the other hand, results in one of the other 2 outcomes, compliance or commitment. In our day-to-day interactions, we often strive for commitment, but will settle for compliance. Commitment means that people buy in completely and internalize what they're being convinced to believe. With my own children, I want them to clean their rooms and help with the dishes, and would prefer that they commit to it, that they do so cheerfully of their own free will. But as we work towards that goal, I will settle for compliance. When I ask, they do it. Many managers I work with feel the same way about their employees. When it comes to customer service, job safety, and other desired work behaviors, commitment is the ultimate goal. But compliance at least means the employees are doing what they're asked when they are asked. Okay, so now that we have a more precise way of talking about success and failure, let's look at the factors that determine whether a particular influence attempt yields conflict, compliance, or commitment. If you step back to think about an influence situation, a political speech in small-town Iowa, for example, you'll quickly realize that there are quite a few moving pieces that could have an impact on the outcome. To organize these pieces into a useful scheme, we can identify 4 basic components that play a critical role. First, there's the politician. Then there's the content and delivery of the speech itself. Next is the crowd. And finally, there's the setting. And really, the 4 components that contribute to the success or failure of this political speech can be detected in almost every influence attempt. So let's give each of these 4 components a more general name that we can apply to any situation where someone tries to persuade or influence others. First, let's call the politician the agent. In any situation, the agent is the person who's trying to influence someone else. Second, let's call the crowd the target. In any situation, the target is the person or group whom the agent is trying to influence. Third, we can generalize the content and delivery of the speech itself by referring to tactics. Every influence attempt involves a set of tactics. In other words, what an agent says or does to accomplish her aims. Fourth, and finally, the setting of that Iowa speech is nothing other than the context. Agents and targets don't operate in a vacuum. They're surrounded by circumstances that shape their interactions. That's context. Okay, so we have agent, target, tactics, and context. You'll want to remember those 4 key components of influence because we'll be returning to them time and time again throughout the course. To make them easier to remember, I've created an acronym from the first letter of each component: A, T, T, and C. Just like the Apple Corporation, let's make liberal use of the letter I to put a vowel. Adding the I, we get attic. If you want to know why a particular influence attempt results in conflict, commitment, or compliance, look in the attic. ATTIC is more than an acronym, though. It's a useful metaphor. Many factors that determine the success or failure of influence operate outside of our conscious awareness. Take the agent, for example, the person who's trying to influence us. Sometimes we meet someone and find her immediately trustworthy or likable, and then find her claims and arguments so compelling. Bob Cialdini, author of the worldwide bestseller Influence, Science, and Practice, talks about influence often happening in a click-whir fashion. It's as if a switch were clicked, and then an automatic routine whirs into action. Something about the agent, or maybe it's the tactic, quickly kicks in a psychological process that ends up with compliance or commitment without any intervening conscious thought. In this way, the 4 factors are very much like the attic of your house. Your attic is always there, and it's always doing what it does, even when you aren't thinking about it. In the same way, factors that make us susceptible to influence are built into our basic psychology and often operate outside of our conscious awareness. That's why it's important for you to learn as much as possible about agent, target, tactics, and context. The better you understand the natural mechanisms that result in influence, the more you can use them to your advantage and correct for them when someone is using them against you. Now, to familiarize you with the attic concept, I'm going to make use of a real-world scenario that we can revisit throughout the rest of this lecture. Here's the situation. Imagine you and 3 business associates are on a trip into the city. Your work is done for the day and you're enjoying a meal at a restaurant together. You've agreed to use the remainder of your free night to spend more time together, but you haven't decided what to do next. Your preference is to see a musical that's been on your wish list for over a year. Another member of the group proposes a walking tour. What are the factors that determine whether you are able to successfully influence your colleagues and see the show you really want to see? We're going to answer that question in terms of the 4 corners of the attic: agent, target, tactics, and context. First, though, let me say a brief word about ethics. For some of you, influence may sound like a bad word, and as we'll see in future lectures, it does indeed have a dark side. There are people who use tricks and lies to get what they want. It's important to state up front that there are also ethical and honest ways to persuade others. And through this course, I will encourage you to stick to these ways. With that in mind, let's get back to our question. What factors come into play when I'm trying to influence my colleagues to see that musical downtown? Let's begin by finding out what research has to say about the A in our acronym, the agent. A few moments ago, I mentioned Bob Cialdini, who is an emeritus professor from Arizona State University. Well, according to Cialdini, liking is a major principle of successful influence. In other words, an agent's success often comes down to how well he or she is liked by other people, the target in particular. When people like you, they are more likely to listen to your arguments and be convinced by them. They're also more likely to want to please you and go along with what it is you want or desire. But what makes people like an agent in the first place? Well, obviously there are many pathways to liking, but one very important one is perceived similarity. When people see you as similar to them in some fashion, they automatically, and I might add, almost immediately, like you more. To illustrate, let me explain the results of 2 studies published by Professor Jerry Berger and his colleagues from Santa Clara University. In study 1, female undergraduates were brought into a room one at a time and told to fill out a survey while sitting next to another student. This second student was actually working with the experimenter. She is what social psychologists call a research confederate. As part of the experiment, the confederate surreptitiously glances at the participant's survey to learn her birthday. After the survey was completed, the experimenter asked a series of questions to both women at once, eventually coming around to asking their birthdays. The research confederate would always speak up first. Half of the time, the confederate would give a birthday that differed from the participant. We'll call that the control condition. The other half of the time, the confederate would claim to have the exact same birthday. After questioning the students, the experimenter would leave the room, and at this point, the confederate would ask the participant for a favor. She explained that an English class assignment required her to find someone she did not know to critique an essay she'd written. She said, "I wonder if you could read this 8-page essay for me and give me 1 page of written feedback on whether my arguments are persuasive and why." In the control condition, just over 1/3 agreed to help, 34%. In the same birthday condition, nearly 2/3 agreed to help, 62%. In other words, nearly twice as many subjects agreed to provide feedback on that essay when they thought the requester was similar to them in some fashion, in this case, because they happened to share the same birthday. In Professor Berger's second study, the researchers wanted to be sure there wasn't something unique about discovering that someone shares the same birthday. So this time, participants were introduced to another student, again a confederate, wearing a name tag and holding a poster. On the poster was a picture of a young lady with a caption including her name and quote. In one condition, the Confederates' name tag showed a name identical to the participants. This is equivalent to a shared birthday. This time it's a shared name. But there were also two other conditions. In one, the person in the poster had a name identical to the participant's name. This allowed the researchers to see if the basic experience of encountering similarity makes people more helpful or likely to comply. In the final condition, there was no name similarity on either the poster or the Confederate's name tag. So, research participants experienced one of three conditions: having the same name with the person holding the sign, having the same name with the person pictured on the sign, or not having any name similarity. In all conditions, the Confederate holding the sign asked the participant for a favor, in this case, a donation to the cause described on the poster. Would the student donate? The study sought to see how much people gave in each condition. Average giving in dollars was as follows. With no name similarity, $1. The same name with the person on the poster, a little less, 81 cents. The same name with the person requesting the donation, $2.07. Again, the perceived similarity between the agent and target makes a huge difference. Comparing no name similarity to the condition where the requester has the same name as the participant, we see a doubling of giving. Study 1 showed a doubling of compliance, helping with that essay, based on shared birthday. And Study 2 showed a doubling of giving based on a shared name. In these studies, participants were not at all aware that they'd been influenced by the incidental similarity between them and the person making a request. If you had asked the participants, were you influenced by the person's birthday or by their name, they would respond blankly. Why would I be? The increase in liking and helping happens outside of awareness, hidden away in the attic of their minds, so to speak. These studies suggest that agents could be more effective influencers when they tap into the power of incidental similarity and liking. So, if you want to be more influential, you might think about highlighting similarities between you and the people you're talking to. Take the scenario where you're trying to influence your colleague to see a show. If you're well liked, then perhaps you've already convinced her. Even so, you might try to find and highlight some similarity that you share. Maybe you both like gardening. Call attention to that and enjoy the conversation that the similarity produces. Now that we've discussed the agent, let's move to target, which in our scenario is the business colleague you're trying to influence to see the musical. What is a characteristic of your colleague that might make her more receptive to your influence? Well, there are many target characteristics that we'll address in this course, but here's one that might surprise you. Where is your colleague from? Rod Bond and Peter Smith, both from the University of Sussex in England, examined 133 compliance studies drawn from 17 different countries. What they found is fascinating. Their analysis revealed that studies conducted in collectivist countries found higher rates of conformity to group opinion than studies conducted in individualist countries. In other words, people from collectivist societies seem to be more susceptible to group influence than people from individualist societies. But what do we mean by collectivist and individualist societies? University of Illinois scholar Harry Triandis describes it this way. In an individualist culture, it is acceptable for a person to place more importance on personal goals than collective goals. In collectivist cultures, the opposite is true. It's expected that a person will place more importance on the collective goals rather than the personal ones. Countries with collectivist cultures include China, Korea, Japan, Brazil, Argentina, and Egypt. Countries with individualist cultures include Germany, Canada, the United States, Australia, Holland, and England. So, returning to our scenario at the restaurant table, we should ask, where is your colleague from? If she's from a collectivist culture, then she may be more likely to go along just to preserve harmony in the group. But if she is more individualistic in orientation, you may have to work a bit harder to convince her. Okay, remember our acronym ATTIC? So far, we've discussed the A, agent, and the first T, target. Now it's time to discuss our second T, tactics. Some influence tactics work better than others, as you've probably witnessed watching some people, get their way with ease, while others really struggle. Let's say, for example, that you want to influence your boss to promote you. What tactics work best? Business professors Tim Judge and Bob Bretz wondered whether focusing on the job, doing a good job at work and letting others know about it, was more important than focusing on your supervisor, agreeing with and praising your supervisor. Judge and Bretz asked graduates from 2 large universities to complete a survey. The survey assessed 2 things. First, how the participants generally influenced others at work, and second, what career outcomes they'd experienced, including current salary and number of promotions. One might imagine that job-focused influence would lead a person to be perceived as competent, and supervisor-focused influence would lead a person to be well-liked. So which is more important? Controlling for other potential causes of career success, the researchers found that focusing on your supervisor had a much more positive effect than anything else. So those who focused their influence on the job actually had lower salaries and fewer promotions than those who focused on their supervisor. Now, these results suggest that tactics that make your boss like you may be more important than tactics that demonstrate your competence on the job. Returning to our situation, colleagues in the city deciding what to do, what tactic might you use? Well, you might compliment your colleague on her good taste and explain why that good taste would result in her enjoyment of the show you want to see. Finally, in our tour of the attic, we come to context. Context may include what has happened recently or what is happening right now around you. Most compelling is what other people are doing. We all have a natural tendency to make sense of the world based on how others react to it. If, for example, you hear an uncertain sound while you're walking through a store, you'll look around. If no one else seems concerned, you'll conclude that all is well and continue on your way. One of the most classic psychology experiments of the 20th century was conducted by Solomon Asch at Swarthmore College. The paradigm for Asch's study was simple. A participant was brought into a room with a number of research confederates. He was told that he was participating in a study of visual acuity. 2 large cards were shown to the group. On one card was a single line, the target line. The other card was a set of 3 lines of varying length. Each person in the room was then asked, which of the 3 lines on this card matches the target line on that card? The experimenter always began with the research confederates, asking each to report which line matched. This is where things got interesting. In some cases, all of the confederates reported the correct answer, but in other cases, they deliberately gave the wrong answer. So what did participants do when everyone stated out loud an opinion that disagreed with what their own eyes were telling them? When the majority in the room claimed the wrong line matched, 1/3 of the participants would go along and also state out loud the incorrect answer. That means that 1/3 looked carefully and reported something they knew to be false just to agree with others in the room. That's the power of context. In another set of studies conducted by Asch, he varied the number of experimental confederates who identified the wrong line. When only one confederate stated an incorrect line, the number of errors made by subjects was quite low. The subject's error rate increased when 2 confederates identified the wrong line, and then got even higher when 3 gave an incorrect answer. Now, further increases, 4, 5, and 6, added a little to error rate, but not much. So it seems that 3 is a magic number. There is a Chinese phrase, 3 people produce a tiger. This is ancient wisdom that captures what Ash discovered in his studies. The parable behind the saying goes a bit like this. The state official, Pang Kong, worried that people would slander him and ruin his favor with the king. To prevent this, he asked the king to imagine a scenario. Suppose, king, that a peasant came to you and reported that a tiger was roaming the busy streets of the market. Would you believe him? The king, of course, said there was no way he would believe. A tiger would never wander out of the forest into a crowded market. Pang Kong continued, what if 2 peasants reported seeing the tiger? The king said he would begin to wonder but would not believe. Pang Kong then asked, what if 3 people say they saw the tiger? The king replied that in this case, he would believe. Pang Kong gently reminded the king that the notion of a live tiger in a crowded market was absurd. Yet when repeated by numerous people, it began to seem real. It is clear there is no tiger in the market, Pang Kong would say. Yet 3 people saying so produces a tiger. Why should the king believe something so unlikely? Of course, what happened in this story was that Pang Kong was talked about badly after he left, and the king refused to ever see him again. Was the king correct to listen to the slanderous talk, or was the official wise in warning against it? It's hard to know. But the saying, 3 people produce a tiger, makes clear the natural process that occurs when we are influenced to conform to a crowd opinion. Let's circle back to the example we've been using throughout the lecture. How might context work in your favor as your business group tries to finalize its plans for the evening? Well, it should be clear from Ash's studies that having most of the group on your side will dramatically increase your chance of winning over your colleague who's proposing an alternative idea. You might even consider winning over other members of the group in advance, so that when the time for the big decision comes, you have the crowd on your side, all claiming, hey, we will have a great time if we go see that show. So the people around you are a big part of the C, or context, of influence. In this lecture, we've also begun to explore the other 3 components of our ATTIC acronym: agent, target, and tactics. And we've begun to see how all of these components help determine whether a particular influence attempt results in conflict, compliance, or commitment. To help you consolidate this information and to put it to good use, I'd like to offer 2 suggestions for things you can try on your own. Influence is a really practical topic, and I think you will find many opportunities to apply what I present to your everyday routines and interactions. First, next time you find yourself being convinced by someone, stop and think. What's going on in the attic? Is there something going on outside of my awareness that's having an effect on me? For example, is someone arguing that you should believe something because other people do? Do you find yourself being persuaded? If so, make a mental note, and you can correct for that by imagining an equal number of people advancing the opposite argument. This may help you to think more critically about the issue for yourself. The second activity I suggest is this. Next time you're out for dinner, try to leverage similarity to get better service. If incidental similarity results in more helping and giving, as the studies we've talked about suggest, then finding similarity with someone waiting on your table might just get you a bit more help than usual. So, ask your server a few questions and look for some similarity, and then point it out. Hey, I'm from Columbia, Maryland too. Or, that's so funny, I love tomatoes too. If Professor Berger's results hold up, then you might just get a little extra help the rest of the dinner. In our next lecture, we'll take a closer look at agents, the A in our attic. If you've ever met someone who seemed to possess some kind of magic that helps them win people over, then join me next time to find out just what that magic is, and even to learn how to get some of it for yourself.